Act 3, Survival. Chapter 24, Emma, now, late night, June 28th. Emma was underwater, looking up through the murky river. People above her moved, talking, their voices muffled, figures blurred. She knew she should be afraid, but she felt nothing, like a sense of detachment. This must be what drowning was like. Drowning? Emma tried to remember, her brain as sluggish as a scum-choked pond. She remembered being frightened, remembered the feeling of her lungs bursting, and the frantic way the river had whipped her around, all white, rushing water and slippery rocks. And then she remembered being cold, so impossibly cold. Another memory grew out of that one, soft and delicate as a soap bubble. Something important. Something to do with the river. Emma crouched on the edge of the water, her hands extended. She moved slowly, so slowly, just like the river here, wide and lethargic. The banks were choked with bunches of long, wide grasses, and hidden inside them a whole group of frogs sang in harmony, greeting the early morning sun, just peeking up over the horizon. She could feel the shiver in the air that meant it would be hot soon, could hear the buzzing of insects waking up, swarming gently over the water's surface. Emma kept her gaze focused. One of the frogs had moved out of the grasses and sat on a rock, his throat swelling and relaxing like a balloon, his back small and brown, and covered in irregular spots. Emma made herself think spots instead of warts, because otherwise she'd be too freaked out to do this, even though Ollie had sworn people couldn't catch warts from a frog. Emma couldn't believe she was actually trusting Ollie. Maybe being at camp really had changed her. Emma inched closer. She held her breath, then lunged forward and caught the frog in her cupped hand. I did it! I did it! She could feel him moving, his webbed hands and feet tapping at her fingers. She held him gently, careful not to squeeze. Look at you, Ollie laughed. You're a natural. When we get home, home. The memory cut off as abruptly and completely as if someone had turned off a movie. Emma gasped, wide awake now, and freezing, the cold tearing through her body like an icy wind, like razor blades slicing into her muscles, chopping into her bones. Cold and then burning, sizzling hot. Her teeth chattered, her head pounded, and her stomach twisted into a queasy knot. She'd never felt so terrible in her life. Better if we had a tent. Abby's voice, the words coming from far away. I still can't believe you didn't bring it. Would you let that go? Ollie's voice, thin and defiant. I can't go back in time, can I? Anyhow. Ollie cut off. Then, Emma, she cried, you're awake. Emma tried to answer, but her teeth clattered violently and she couldn't stop shaking. Sit her up, Abby said, but gently. Ollie scooted close, her face a white blur against the night sky as she carefully pulled Emma up, then helped her scoot back against something hard and cold behind her. Drink this. Abby held out a plastic camp mug, steam rising from the top. Emma tried to take it, but her arms were trapped. For one panic-filled second, she thought she had been frozen to her sides. Then she realized she'd been zipped inside a sleeping bag. She slid one arm free, but immediately the chill surrounded her and she yanked it back, hugging herself, too cold to move. Here. Abby crouched next to her and held the mug to her face. Emma breathed in the heat of the steam, wishing there were more of it, enough to envelop her whole body. Be careful what you wish for. She met Abby's eyes over the top of the mug and remembered her sister's last wish. Emma waited for the pain of that memory to hit her, but as Abby tipped the cup towards her lips, Emma realized something she'd never really considered before. Sometimes words were just words. She swallowed the hot water, feeling it trace a warm path down her throat and into her stomach, where it gurgled and sloshed. Abby took the empty cup, then fiddled with something on the ground. I'm pouring you another. Think you can hold on to this one? Emma hesitated, then reluctantly unwound her arm just a little. She looked down at her hands, which were hidden under two pairs of thick wool socks that didn't smell very clean. It should be gross, but for once she didn't really care about that. She wiggled her fingers beneath them, wincing at the pins and needles shooting up her arms, then took the mug from Abby and clutched it to her chest, the warmth of it radiating through her cushioned fingers, the steam bathing her face. Lean forward, Abby ordered, sliding a second unzipped sleeping bag behind Emma. She kept hold of one end and passed the other end to Ollie. Then the two of them nestled in against Emma's sides, clutching their corners and huddling close. The warmth of their bodies slowly thawed Emma's insides. She was still very cold, but her shivering had lost that desperate, all-consuming edge. She felt a little more alive now, a little more like herself, and not some half-frozen thing. Now that feeling had started to return. She was very aware of several long, painful scrapes down her back. She shifted, the muscles in her back and legs aching, bruises twinging. Everything hurt all over, but she was so tired that it all faded into a throbbing backdrop, easy to ignore. She took another sip, actually tasting it this time. It tasted as good as the socks on her hands smelled. "What is this?" she croaked. "Boiled river water," Abby said. "We figured you'd probably developed a taste for it," Ollie added. Emma actually laughed, a sound like rocks falling, and suddenly both sisters were talking and laughing at once, not just huddled next to her, but hugging her tightly. Emma almost felt like she was drowning again, their arms smothering her, but she didn't care. "So scared," Abby was saying. "I can't believe you didn't drown." "Ice cold," Ollie talked over her, "and your lips were blue, like a corpse. So disgusting, but sorry I ever said that. I'll be more careful what I wish for, I promise," Abby finished. "So disgusting," Ollie added one more time. Emma smiled. Even though her face ached with the movement, she couldn't help it. "I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive." The thought kept repeating in her head. She was alive, and she wasn't alone anymore, and that warmed her up better than any beverage could. "I missed you both, too," she said. Across from her, the river glittered in the starlight, beautiful and inky black, while above the sky seemed to stretch forever. She realized that she was wearing Abby's jacket and a pair of Abby's pants, probably her hat, too. "Thanks for the clothes," Emma said. "You're welcome," Abby said. "I didn't have any antibiotic cream or bandages or, well, any first aid stuff at all, actually. So I couldn't do much about your cuts and scrapes. Hopefully they don't get infected." "Oh, good. Something else to worry about." But Emma found it was hard to be too concerned about potential future issues. Not now. Not when she'd almost been dead. She gulped down some more disgusting water and looked around at their shelter. Her sisters had staked out a place tucked inside a V-shaped rock, a granite slab rising above them and to the right, blocking most of the wind. Emma frowned, her brain moving in slow, creeping steps, every thought taking forever to sink in. "Wait," she said, staring out at the night sky. "Where's the tent?" I forgot it," Ollie said. "You forgot the tent?" Emma gaped. "I'm glad you're not dead," Ollie tried, grinning weakly. Emma sighed. "Did you really forget it, or did you just not feel like carrying it?" "I'm really glad you're not dead." "No thanks to you," Emma muttered, thinking of the heavy pack she'd been lugging around stuffed full, a pack that was now lost forever on the bottom of the river. "Here." Ollie thrust a small dark shape at her. "To keep you toasty." Emma looked, all floppy worn ears and soft fur. Ollie never let anyone cuddle with Mr. Snuffles. Emma stared into those flat, bunny eyes and realized that this was the closest thing to an apology she was ever going to get. Ollie did not do apologies. A gust of wind stirred the river and then whipped around their makeshift camp. Emma clenched her jaw shut to stop her teeth from chattering harder and trying not to think of the tent. It got cold in there, too, but not like this. She pulled Mr. Snuffles inside her sleeping bag, curling around him, but the cold followed her in. There was no way she'd be able to sleep like this. It didn't seem to affect Ollie, though. Her younger sister breathing deepened, and within moments, Emma could hear the first faint snores. "Emma?" Abby whispered. Are you gonna be okay?" Emma's mind felt as waterlogged as the rest of her, and it was a struggle to hold on to her thoughts as they drifted in all directions, caught in some unknown current. Her whole body hurt, a deep, bone-weary ache. The water she drank sloshed in the pit of her stomach as she shivered, and her head throbbed with every beat of her heart. In front of her, down a scramble of rocks, lay the river, full and gleaming and deadly. Beyond it, hidden in overlapping shadows, miles and miles of wilderness stretched along, a maze of trees and shrubs and deep ravines. It all felt so impressively vast, and they were the only tiny lost speck. "I don't know," Emma said at last. "Are any of us?" Quiet descended on them, broken only by the sounds of the wind, their chattering teeth, the gentle rushing of the river. "I didn't think we would find you," Abby said, breaking the silence. "I thought you were dead." "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "You fell into a river and were swept away. You should be dead." Emma frowned. "Did I mess up your plans or something?" It was almost like Abby wanted her to die, and she remembered how tightly Abby had hugged her. "I was only looking for you because, well, I wasn't sure what else to do, and Ollie—" They both looked over at Ollie, who snored, oblivious. "I didn't want to tell Ollie you were gone," Abby finished. "Anyhow," she gave herself a little shake, jerking the sleeping bag. "My point is that you're alive. We found you." She turned and smiled, her face so close to Emma she could see the gleam of tears in her eyes. "All three of us are together, so maybe we'll be okay." Emma smiled back. "Maybe we're lucky. Maybe we'll wake up in the morning and Dana will be standing there, ready to lead us back to camp." "And maybe she'll have pancakes with her," Emma said, "and hot tea, not just boiled river water." Abby laughed, but the sound died away, and as she turned back to look over the river, Emma knew she didn't really believe any of that. She didn't think that they would be okay. This was just her making another wish. "I wish I were an only child." "I'm sorry," Abby whispered, and it was like she had read Emma's mind. "I didn't mean what I said about being an only child. I'm glad I have sisters." "I'm glad I have sisters too," Emma said. Abby took a deep breath, like she was preparing herself for something difficult and unpleasant. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Emma frowned. The way Abby said that made her nervous. It sounded like an awful lot like "no offense, but," which was never a good opening. "I guess," Emma said. "You remember how after your audition you were sitting by yourself at lunch?" Emma flinched. "Do we have to talk about this?" "So then I started sitting with you," Abby continued, her voice soft but relentless. "I thought you'd get over your embarrassment and make some new friends, and then I'd be free to do the same thing. But you didn't. You just settled. And you expected me to settle too. And it wasn't just lunch. After school we hung out together practically every day. Weekends too. I could never get away." "Why are you telling me this?" Emma's ears burned with humiliation. Abby had never wanted to hang out with her. She only did it out of pity. Hearing the truth was almost worse than drowning. Abby shifted, and a trickle of cold air found the newly created space between them. I'm saying this was all wrong. I liked hanging out with you. I just felt a little suffocated. And I'm telling you this because I think you probably felt suffocated too. No, I was happy. Are you sure? Because back in California, we hung out together, but we also had our own friends, and you seemed a lot happier there. Emma started to argue and then stopped. It was true. Sometimes she and Abby would do things together, but not all the time. But after they moved to Salt Lake City, Abby was the only person she hung out with. She hadn't felt suffocated. She had felt vulnerable, like she was standing on a bridge and only one side was secured. She'd known that Abby could ditch her at any time. Then she'd be falling, and she'd have nothing, which was exactly what happened. Emma thought of those first lunches after Abby stopped sitting with her, how she'd watched her sister laughing with Dustin and the rest of the cross-country team at their crowded table across the cafeteria while she sat picking at her food all alone. It had been horrible. And then Grace had asked if she'd like to sit with her and her friends. Emma had occasionally eaten at their table after that, but she'd stayed mostly quiet, aware that they weren't really her friends. Only now, looking back, she wasn't sure why she had felt that way. Maybe she had been afraid to open up to them. It was like after she froze up at the auditorium, she stayed frozen. We were holding each other back, Abby said. I didn't feel like I could look for other friends with you around all the time. And with me around, you didn't feel like you needed to. And I didn't try to encourage you because maybe I was afraid. Abby took another deep breath. I was afraid you would find friends before I did, and I'd be the one eating alone. She shifted again, moving closer. I'm sorry, though. I should have been honest with you. Emma shrugged. Really? And I still want to hang out when we get home, but I think I think it's time for you to get back out there and meet other people too when we get home. Emma liked the sound of those words enough that she didn't argue, even though it wasn't that simple. Making friends was hard, especially when you spent the last year and a half ignoring most people. But she'd be in 8th grade, a brand new school year. Who knew what could happen? When we get home, Emma whispered. Are you mad at me? Emma remembered how it felt when she'd been caught underwater, how trapped and drowning, with death pressing down on her, everything that seemed to matter so much wasn't important anymore. Sitting here now, safe for the moment, she could still feel that looming danger casting its shadow over everything else, and all of those strong emotions, her anger, the hurt, felt as distant as her safe, warm bed. They were feelings that belonged to someone else, a different Emma. I'm not mad, she said at last. I understand what you mean. You do? Emma nodded. Back at camp, she'd thought the distance between her and Abby might be impossible to close, but they were sisters. And she finally really understood what that meant. They might feel disconnected from each other sometimes, but their relationship was strong enough to withstand those periods when one of them drifted out of range. Eventually, they would find each other again. And I'm sorry too, Emma added, thinking of the final thing that she had done, the thing that broke Abby and Dustin up. Abby had been honest with her, and then she turned it into a weapon. For everything. I'll forgive you if you forgive me. Deal. Emma leaned her head onto Abby's shoulder, and Abby rested her own head on hers, like they used to do when they were little. And Emma closed her eyes and finally let her sleep pull her down.